Let's just make sure this is going. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for coming to another Promotable event. So I'm Aaron Fallouz, founder and CEO of Promotable. And once again, thanks for coming. So I'm going to make a couple of quick announcements and then hand it off to David. So while you're kind of getting started here, a couple quick things. First of all, please feel free to start dropping your questions into the comments. We'll address them if they're relevant to those slides. We'll address them as they come. Otherwise, we'll take the balance of the time after the presentation to answer any and all of your questions. This particular topic is kind of near and dear to me. I think it's something that is one of the most important and often overlooked elements within data. So for anyone who's thinking, I want to break in, or I want to figure out how I can use data more in my day-to-day job, this is the thing for you. So that said, so Promotable, so we are a workforce accelerator helping people close that data skills gap. And we do that by a couple of things. One, events like this, where we bring in practitioners from top companies every single week to help you level up on the data side. In addition to that, we also do more advanced courses. So if you want to dive deeper into data, learn things like SQL, Tableau, Python, and walk away with a work product you can show a recruiter, we have courses for that. Again, taught by practitioners as well, all in the evening, live online. If anyone's interested, feel free to drop us a note. I'll be leaving my email address in the comment section, but also feel free to go to promotable.io or just drop a comment in there and we will be in touch. I'm happy to set up a conversation. With that, please give us a like. If you're already on LinkedIn, please do it there. If you're on YouTube, give us a like there. It sounds really trivial, but these are really important for us. It's one of those things where every little bit counts. And with that, one more thing, we will be recording this. We always get that question up front. So just want to let everyone know, no need to take a bunch of screenshots. You can if you want to. But of course, we'll be sending that out a couple days after the event. Once it's been posted, it'll be on our YouTube channel with all of our other previous events. So that said, I'm handing it off to David and take it from there.
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here with all of you, especially on a holiday. And so thank you for making time. And I do want to take a moment and honor any of you who are veterans or the children, friends, brothers, relatives of veterans. Thank you so much for protecting our country and for your service. What I'm talking about today is how to ask the right data-driven questions. I'm very passionate about this topic. As I've built my career, I've seen, particularly on the digital side, I've seen companies go from having almost no data and no understanding of the data to almost being overwhelmed by what's coming in. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my experience so that you understand how I've come to my point of view. And just to reiterate what Aaron said, please feel free to ask questions throughout. If you do have questions, Aaron will happily and graciously interrupt me because I want to make sure that when things are top of mind for you, I'm able to speak to them. But I've worked in a fair different number of environments. Yes, I'm going to do build slides to keep the suspense going. Most recently, I was at Roku working on the media side. I've been at Betterment, a fintech company. I was at Citibank, I'm a financial services company. And I worked for the iconic I Love New York tourism campaign, among others that I'm not including in the slide. And across all of those brands, I've sold everything from media and subscriptions to stocks and financial services, to credit cards, to the concept of tourism and visiting New York State. As I've done that, what's helped me develop a point of view of how to ask the right questions of the data is recognizing that at the end of the day, by and large, no matter where I'm working, I'm always selling, I'm always convincing essentially the same person. But the data that I have at my fingertips is going to change. What data have I used? In short, a ton. Here's a smattering of different sources. And what I want to call out here is that some of these things are going to be familiar to you, right? Click-through rates or application rates for credit cards, share of wallet, churn, lifetime value. But there are a lot of other data sources that we have at our fingertips, and I'm going to talk about those because those are essential, not just to remembering them so that you know how and when to ask the right question, but in answering them. That could be everything from search queries, from either paid search and organic SEO, to if you work for a company that has a search engine on its site, to thinking about lifetime tenure, thinking about the competitive data set and anecdotally what are they doing. And I hope that you walk away with a more expansive set of data concepts that you can work with so that you're not just staying rooted in the numbers to answer questions. Before I walk you through an example of how I've used data and how I've asked better questions of the data to go from data to actual insights, let me talk a little bit about why I feel so strongly that questions matter. And I want to do it by first acknowledging that this is a skill that I'm talking about that we actually do in our everyday lives all the time, but it's something that we don't actually acknowledge because we're so accustomed to doing it. My hope is that in walking you through how I think about data and asking questions, you'll be able to walk away remembering some key tips to bring the discipline that we have in our everyday life to marketing, and for those of you who might be in other disciplines, to those disciplines as well. So I want to start by sharing a couple of quick everyday ways in which the question that we ultimately answer contains an objective that's a little bit different from the way we ask a question. Often if you're talking to somebody about where to go, you'll say, how do I get there? What we're actually trying to answer is what's the fastest route. When you ask for directions, you almost never are thinking, oh, but can you please tell me the slowest or most convoluted way? So our objective is about the fastest route. And because we inherently understand that when we're talking, we're able to give effective directions. When we ask what's the quality of something if you're going shopping, what we ultimately want to know is it good value for the price? Now, the concept of value may be different, but if you said, hey, I saw this really great jacket the other day, winter's coming, you should get it. I'm like, well, what's the quality? If you've already told me the price, what I'm doing in my head is I'm collecting a set of data points that I'm able to align them with my preferences and my objectives to be able to figure out whether it's right for me. I can't get there if all I do is start and stop with the question of quality. Another example that we go with every day is what's the weather? We often ask the weather because we have some other objective in mind. Am I dressed appropriately? Am I going to be warm? Am I going to be cold? And when we think about unpacking that question of what's the weather, we're going to pull in enough data points to really get to that objective that we have of knowing, am I dressed appropriately? And we're going to apply that to marketers and data analysts working on marketing today. Because when marketers and their data partners, data scientists, data analysts, learn to do this, we avoid analysis paralysis and going so far into the data weeds that we forget where we're going. We actually stay true and recognize our actual objectives. And that's what helps achieve differentiated growth. And that's what I've done and led my teams to do across my career. Before we get into that deep example, I want to start with a couple of other quick hits and unpack a little bit some of the more common marketing scenarios. So I want to use this framework of when we ask, what is it that we really want to know and what is it we're trying to do? To me, thinking about questions in this way really help us to get to the right question being asked, regardless of the words that we're actually hearing from our business partners. So when we ask what was the click-through rate, what we're really trying to get at is, did customers engage with our company? Why do we want to know that? Because we want to capture or recapture their attention to earn their business. But if I only give you the click-through rate, I'm not actually going to learn anything novel, or I'm unlikely to learn something novel that's going to tell me how or whether I'm able to recapture those users to earn their business. Another quick example, marketers live and die by acquisition costs. Yes, Aaron?
Sorry to cut you off. I wasn't sure if you weren't able to move your slides or if you're intending to, but they're not moving on our end.
Are you able to see the full slide now?
Yeah, we can see the slide. It's just that it's still on the first slide. I think.
Oh, that's odd. Let me think about that one for a minute. What I'll do is let me stop sharing, and I'll try I'll restart it and see if that fixes it. But I'm glad that you all mentioned that.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I share the deck that you sent me in PowerPoint form and send it off to the group?
Please do.
Okay, well, don't do that.
All right, let me try this way and ask if you're able to see the slide that's called Quick Hits. Aaron, are you able to see it now?
No, you still need to share your screen. It was turned off. There it goes. Bring it back. Yep.
You see quick hits now?
Absolutely.
Great. Let me share it this way. We're going to suspend with the builds. So thank you for calling that out.
No
So
worries.
maybe the second question, right? Marketers, the main thing that you want to do when you're acquiring a customer is do it as cheaply as possible. So when you're marketing in a bunch of different channels, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or OTT media, you want to know, right, what is the cost? And we're doing that because what we really want to know is, are my dollars being used efficiently? Why do I need to know that? Because the action I want to be able to take is reallocate my dollars or actually save money and apply it to other areas of marketing. Another common question we ask or will get as marketers and marketing data analysts is, which was the most effective ad? What we really want to know is not what, but we want to know why. Why are we successful? And we do that so that we can replicate success and avoid performance dips. So keeping that kind of framework in mind of understanding the questions we ask often are leading us to something else we want to know, I'm going to do a deep dive here, and I'm going to go use an example from my time at Citi years ago. I'm not going to be sharing any actual data here. I'm going to be talking you through the thought process. And I'm going to loosely stick to what actually happened for the purposes of really teaching how I think here. But I'm going to stay pretty true to form. And the problem I'm going to set up here is that when my team was managing the citycards.com website, we knew two things. One is that credit cards was a product-heavy business. You put a single credit card in front of the customer because the information you could share about that was king, and that's what got customers to convert. But what we noticed here was that the clicking conversion rates on the website were down. And the most obvious question that led to was, what's wrong with our ads? Why aren't they working anymore? You obviously know already from where I'm heading that that's not really the right question. But I'm going to unpack it a little bit here. And what I show on the top right of the slide here is that the missing objective in going from the observation to the question is that we want to grow our new customer base. And if you're Citibank and all you're thinking is, my clicking conversion rates are down, what's not working? The opportunity to really crack open the code on growing new customers is a lot smaller if you stay within that mindset, as opposed to if you reimagine the question around a broader growth one. And so if you stick with that first question that you built around it, the data you're going to gather is going to be exactly the one that the question asked. You're going to look at the click-through rate, you're going to look at the conversion rate, and you're going to make some simple decisions based on that. You're going to pause the ads that aren't working, you'll come up with a new creative brief to kind of fix the ones that are, and you'll probably do some sort of A/B or multivariate testing to figure out which of the new ads that you created are the ones that are most likely to succeed. That's a perfectly fair and balanced approach. And if you're looking simply to optimize the media or the campaign, that's often a smart way to go. But if you're asking the question with a bigger goal of growing new customers, the results are going to be a little bit lackluster. What's likely to happen is you're going to get a little bit of a bump on the creative after you launch it. But in a few months, maybe even less than that, if you are in a very fast-moving business, you're going to plateau and end up right where you started. What ends up happening then is you end up in this non-virtuous loop where you're constantly going back and saying, my click-through rate, my conversion rates are down, so I have to go and develop new creative. That's not where differentiated growth comes from. And what I'm going to walk through now in the next bunch of minutes is showing you how I pushed my team to ask the question differently, show you the data that we tapped into to round out our story, and then talk to you about how it led to undifferentiated growth by leading to an insight that was far broader than just what was happening on the website. And so I'm going to break it down by, instead of going right from observation to what feels like the obvious question that we'll often get asked, is I'm going to move and say, well, what if we go back to that objective? We want to drive sustained new customer growth. And before I talk about three questions that pop up for me here, I want to empower everybody who's listening to know that you all have an opportunity and a responsibility to bring the objective in. So whether you're a junior marketer on the team, a senior marketing executive, the head of a data science team, or a data analyst who's 2 weeks on the job, if you understand the true objectives of the person that you're talking to, that will either give you the confidence to know when you shouldn't actually take a step further and all you want is the click and conversion rate, but also then the confidence and understanding of when to reframe the question, saying, what I hear you actually wanting to do is this, and I'm going to pull together the data and I'm going to pull together the story that's going to help you achieve that. This slide to me is the first one that really shows you how we got there when I was at Citi. By knowing that what we really wanted to do is drive sustained growth, I took a step back from the question of why are ads working? And I said, well, what trend are we seeing in other marketing channels? Are they also experiencing performance decay? Does this dip look similar to other dips we've seen? Because creative, again, it goes through waves. It performs, it kind of plateaus. Does it actually look like other dips that we've seen? And are there other customer signals that are changing? If we were to look beyond click-in conversion rate, are we seeing anything that might indicate to us whether we have a new kind of opportunity to drive growth? And so if you think with those questions in mind, by keeping that core objective, you can start to pull in data that goes far beyond click-in conversion. And so on the top left, why do I have these icons twice? If one of the questions is what's happening in other channels, then of course you need to go beyond what's happening in the marketing channel that's beyond the immediate one you're looking at. You could look at display, you could look at TV, you could look at paid search, you could look at paid social. If you're doing direct mail, right? There's so many channels out there, but you can look at what's happening and start to get a picture of whether, based on your understanding of, is the creative similar, different, what's my expectation of the channel, start to build a pattern. You can also build in customer journey data. If you have an attribution model, did they go from display to the website, or was the website the only place they visited? You can look at new versus return customers, and you can look at how long these journeys are lasting for each one. You can look at how much time passes between a first visit and conversion, or a first visit and a second visit, or their exposure across channels. And in the case of Citi, right, there are other companies out there in addition to the direct competitors like a Chase. There's creditcards.com, creditkarma.com. What are they doing? What's their customer experience? And what we ended up seeing in this data is that there was a general trend happening in the credit card space where, and this may seem counterintuitive, but this was the insight that we would have missed looking only at click and conversion rates. But the reason I thought that creative wasn't performing is that when you line up all of this data, what became really apparent is that single products were no longer the entry point into a customer's way of thinking. They didn't want to just see the product that a company thought was best for them with a really good offer. They wanted to survey the landscape. This isn't going to surprise anybody, right, who's been around in the last 5 or 10 years, because so many of the experiences, so many of the brands that we cherish have gone in this direction. The credit card space wasn't quite there. But the data told this really, really rich story about how putting multiple products in front of the consumer, showing them that there is choice, there is variety, and helping them and developing tools and putting tools in their hand that let them take the next step rather than taking it for them, that was really, really powerful. And by understanding that insight, developing that insight, we realized that that was the unifying theme across the data. And we realized that that actually led to new opportunities, new testing opportunities, new growth opportunities beyond the very specific one we had in mind. And the reason that I was very restrained in showing specific data techniques or analytic techniques or models to being used is that in asking the right question, they're beside the point. If you take data and you start with a particular analytic method, or you use a couple of data points, you can miss the bigger picture that's being told. Good marketers, and especially really good and smart data analysts, will know what tools to bring into the problem once they know what that question is. And so that's why I'm focusing on a broad array of data data types here, because they're so critical to figuring out how you're going to get the answer. I trust that a data analyst is going to know what to do with the information, but that is secondary to knowing what do I want to do and how do I get there. And so what did that enable us to do beyond figuring out what you might do differently with the creative? It allowed Citi to move from single product to multi-product campaigns and creatives. That seems kind of small, but that was a pretty big shift in the way that marketing was done. But if you're resetting the baseline, you're building a new backbone, and you're not going to get weighed down by ways of thinking that are going to get you into that unvirtuous cycle. Citi was able to reorient their web and mobile shopping experiences around multi-product exploration. That's really powerful because now you started with a simple question of why are clicking conversion rates down? That was the observation, with the question of why aren't my ads working? And now you're getting to a place where you're saying, I actually know how I want to change my web and change my mobile experience. It leads to new and different test opportunities where you might shift your focus away from testing particular ads, or you're going to test them differently. and you're going to pay more attention to the data that's tied to those new experiences. And that's the last key important part here, is updating your campaign success metrics. If you pull a vast data set to answer a question, as you start testing the hypothesis that comes out of it, it's really important to then rethink the data that you're going to use going forward, both from an analytics standpoint, but more importantly, from the way that you measure your success. At Citi, in making the shift, you of course were going to shift the way that you looked at success, because a multi-product campaign, you're not looking at the immediate conversion right there. You go back to certain metrics like, did I shorten the time frame it took to convert a user by enabling these multi-product experiences? And as a result, that's where you get undifferentiated growth. And undifferentiated for businesses can look really, really different. For some companies, a 1 or 2 percentage point lift can be really, really powerful. There are times, and I did this across my career, where going from, by reframing the question and pulling in different data, I was able to get 10, 15, 20, 25% lift out of either certain tests or sustained growth. And you're not often able to see that. So thank you for listening to me and indulging my experience as I unpacked one particular example. I hope you were able to learn a few things about how starting with a simple question often masks the deeper question underneath, but why getting there can be so much more powerful and rich. And so with that, I'm opening the floor to questions and would love to have an open dialogue so that I get to learn from your experiences and can share a little bit more about what I learned in my career.
Awesome. Well, that was super insightful, I think really concise and really good. I'm just going to use the moderator's prerogative here and take a question off the board while I give everyone a few minutes to kind of get their thoughts together and throw something in here. And also, everyone, I did send a Google Drive link with the slide deck, so you'll all have that. Feel free to look at that. If you'd like us to go back to any of the slides, happy to do that and dive into it. But for me, the question I want to touch on is just, because I think we talk a lot about kind of the data, but I think one thing that is also overlooked is about who's asking it and talking about those stakeholders. And so kind of curious, typically who, in a more senior role like yours, who are the stakeholders? Like who's asking these questions? And then just kind of generally like, how does that impact what we deliver, or what we talk about, or just that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that I've had to actually think about right as I grow in my career. Is the questions that I need to ask or that I expect my teams to ask and answer has changed. At this point, in my career where I'm a team leader, I'm often asking questions that are about the bottom line, right? How can I conserve budget? What are some creative ideas out there that will help us, right, break through the competition in a different way? And I expect my teams to be able to unpack that. And what I'm inherently asking them and inherently entrusting them to do is to go through this exercise so that if I ask, right, was our media efficient enough? They know that the objective is, how do we come up with the right media mix to be able to consistently innovate, knowing that if you just continue to put more money into a certain channel, your acquisition cost for that channel is going to go up. So as I'm asking a question, I might ask something high level. I'm trusting them to break it down, but I also want to have a dialogue with my management style. Let's have a conversation. And one of the things that I appreciate is that there are times when I'll get a question right. There are times when I don't. And some of my best learning moments have actually come from asking a question. It could be as simple as, why did this work or why didn't it? And the person I'm chatting to, whether it's the channel marketer on my team or somebody on the product team or the data analyst, who can say, actually, what I think you want to put your eye on is this. And they can say, this is going to answer the question from a different angle. And so I know I'm not really directly answering your question, but really what I'm driving at is, yeah, certainly as people get more senior in their careers, the level at which they're focusing is going to change. When I started my career, I was asking, did it perform? What was the click-through rate? What was the conversion rate? That's part of being a responsible channel manager. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to share is that the ability to stay focused on an objective and make sure you're pulling in the right elements, that doesn't change regardless of how high up the chain you go.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful answer. We had actually a good question that I haven't really thought about, especially when it comes to marketing, but they're asking within like your team, we're talking about doing data analysis. What kinds of roles would be under your team? Is it channel marketer? Do you have a marketer and a data person, or is everyone really cross functional?
It's been different in my different roles. So you're certainly coming from, when I was at an organization like Citi, it was really, really big. So there was a data science team, and we had some dedicated folks with whom we partnered on the day-to-day, and they acted and functioned like they were part of my team, even though they sat elsewhere. I've been on teams where I had, data analysts on my team. And so, look, every organization is different. What I look for in an organization is how well do you partner. An organization is running well when you can have this dialogue really, really quickly, regardless of where people sit. And you're not afraid to say, hey, I think you're actually asking this, or say, hey, can you actually clarify the question? I'm not really sure why you're asking that. Or is this really the data that you want to answer the question? So you can kind of sit anywhere. I've been in a lot of different environments. They can all work if you have the right relationships built.
Fair enough. Yeah, that does go to, I think, one thing that we do often miss is the difference between being at a company like Citi, right? You're talking about, I don't know how many thousands of employees, but lots of them, where you have people who have people who have people who do stuff, versus I'm sure, I know Betterment, at least before they raised their first 100 million, they were probably a little bit smaller, and so you may have had a team of two. Someone asked how you'd respond to someone who would ask to grow your ROI. I know it's kind of a broad question, but it's still, I think, something that's worth talking about.
Yeah, and thank you for asking this question. Certainly as a marketing leader, this is something that's always top of mind. So let me answer it by kind of going through the method that I shared here. When people are talking about a return on investment, return on investment is often, it's a ratio. It's how much am I putting in and how much am I getting back. One of the key ways that folks look at this today is LTV to CAC, so lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. So if you know the way that you measure return on investment, the first thing you want to do is kind of unpack the math there and figure out what levers you can pull. If you're measuring return on investment as lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, you have two options: grow your lifetime value or shrink your customer acquisition cost. Or obviously, right, you could do both at the same time. And so if you're working at a company where you feel that, if you're an e-commerce company and you feel really confident that your acquisition costs are pretty low, I'd focus on driving greater lifetime value. And that may not sit with the acquisition marketing team. That may, sit more with their retention team, because right, lifetime value is a long-term measure, but it could be a combo of both. And so I would say start by understanding what the measurement is, where the gap is to goal. How much do I want to grow my return on investment? And I know we're talking about here marketing and data, but another thing is always ask the question of where else in the marketing budget can you cut? Depending on, some companies will include different types of spend in marketing investment. Some will include agency fees, or right, the media fee that you're paying on top of the actual raw media. Those could be places where you can actually find cost savings as well. And I'm calling that out because, understanding that can sometimes lead you to the right answer. Say, you know what? We're including this type of spend in our calculation when we look at the return. And I actually think I can get a 10-15% reduction here tomorrow before you look at another data point, before you look at it. So it's a great question. I would say start by understanding how your company measures it, then break it apart into its constituent pieces and figure out what your objective is for each of those pieces, and think about what levers can you turn on or turn off and test around to be able to back into change. But it's a great question.
Awesome. Here's another interesting question. James is asking about, because obviously you've worked across quite a few different industries, and so he's curious if what's changed in your process, especially when you're tackling questions that might be more industry specific, or do you have like a framework that kind of you can take to finance and take to tourism and kind of work from there?
I'm smiling so widely when you ask, is because whenever I interview for a position, it's a common question that I get, and I'll share with you the answer that I give, which is a genuine one, which is that one of the things that I believe has made me, an effective strategic marketer is working in different industries and having to find the commonality across them. It's not always apparent, right? What does direct mail have in common with Instagram or, over the top media? But when you think about the role of a marketer and you think about the methods that you have to go through, it's essentially the same. And the thing that's gotten me through all of those is really it's asking questions. So when I'm at the when I was at the I Love New York tourism campaign, I had to know what was the objective, and I had to know how to apply it to the questions being asked, so that I didn't get lost in the noise, so that I could come up with really cool, new, and exciting opportunities that were relevant for the business. And because I never found that to be tourism specific, when I went over to Citibank, I had to learn the ins and outs of the credit card business. But the part that was constant was being able to ask questions in a curious way and stay in the objectives. And that's actually what has enabled me to come up the learning curve when I go to a new industry, and why I'm not afraid of it. By knowing what Citi wanted to do from an objective point of view, I could then say, okay, if you're looking at this data set, which I haven't worked for before, or hey, here's a concept like interchange, which affects the bottom line in credit cards. Interchange is the amount of money that you make when everybody swipes. Those are part of the overall financials of a credit card company, and they weigh very heavily on the bottom line. By focusing on objectives and questions and understanding what role pieces like that do and don't play in marketing, helped me figure out the credit card business, kind of fit it into the mold of marketing that I had, and then kind of break that mold so that I was no longer biased by previous industries. And so that's kind of my medium range answer. My short answer is this method has worked well for me. It's the key to kind of staying nimble across media and finding what's common. And part of it is also personality. I'm the kind of person who thrives by going into new environments. Some people can be really successful in one industry and want to be successful in one industry. This method still applies. So that's a little bit of how this presentation relates, and a little bit about just me and what gets me to put my feet on the ground in the morning. So thank you for your question, James.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think I can definitely relate to I think when you start to feel comfortable that at the end of the day, it starts to become just columns and rows. Like the data is the data. If you can unpack, at the end of the day, everyone has their cost basis, whether it's interchange fees or it's, some sort of their marketing spend. At the end of the day, it's all kind of there. One question I realized that I skipped Wei Su's question earlier, and I know you hit on this a little bit. I think it's the theme of the talk, but I think it's really important to kind of go back to it. And she's asking, how do you know when you've picked the right, the most relevant questions? Like when you're talking about looking at a conversion rate and it goes down, I think what she's asking is how do you not mess up? How do you make sure that I'm asking the right questions when there's so many factors at play? How do I not ask the totally off question?
That's a fantastic question. And you're right in the sense that I have a little bit of a bias, having been in the marketing industry for so long. I have a sense of kind of what to ask of certain things. What I would say is don't be afraid to make a mistake. In having the conversation, that's where you get kind of the nuggets to pursue insight from. If you don't ask the question, you're never going to know. And I'll go back to what I shared at the beginning of the presentation and saying that, sometimes, the objective is I want to optimize my creative, and you want to start and stop with largely click-through rate and conversion rate, because that one or a combination of those are going to tell you how it's working. So I would say that the key is more knowing when there might be something more there so that you don't go down a rabbit hole. But truly, it's for those of you who are joining who might have a couple years of experience, I would say make a lot of mistakes and find a buddy internally who can be somebody. A mentor of mine once said that she had a BS buddy in the room at all times. And that was someone who could provide honest feedback either in a meeting through a gentle nudge or afterwards and be like, hey, that question really missed the mark. Or with whom this person could go and say, you know what, I've got a presentation or I've got an analysis coming due, and I feel like it's a little risky to go off here. Can we talk it through? Find someone with whom you're really, really comfortable having that conversation, hone your skills, and don't be afraid. If you're the marketer, you're the data analyst, also talk to your manager or talk to a manager or a peer in a different team and say, hey, I know that the project was this, but I really think the question is this. How do you feel? Get real-time feedback. In my experience, good managers, and most managers are excellent managers, they're going to be really open to that, because what they're going to hear you doing in there is saying, I know what we're trying to do, and I think there's another way. I can get myself part of the way there, but I want to learn from you as well. So I would say don't be afraid to make mistakes. Empower yourself and those around you to know that you want to have this conversation. And you'll start to gain a sense of when you want to take a risk and when you won't. And you'll also start to fine-tune your own sense of when have you really hit on the right questions, so that going back to someone in the first try, you asked me this, what I know you really wanted is that. And so here's the answer based on a more robust set of data to that question that I'm pretty sure I heard from you. I think it was Wei Su, and apologies if I'm not getting that right, who asked the question. That was an excellent one, and I'm sure all of us are going to continually learn throughout our careers from your having asked that.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. It was Wei Su, and she just thanked you for that. And I totally agree. I think like it's you should never be afraid to take the risk of being wrong. Obviously, don't go in front of make a big presentation and do something that's been like not checked, but you can quality check, right? And it's even like in our classes, we'll ask like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, what I want you to do is go home, try something, mess it all up, and then come back with questions. Because that's the only way you learn, right? It's like when you're in school, you get the A. No one tells you why you got what you got wrong. They just like pat in the back, keep doing what you're doing, and then you get a C the next time, and you're like, what did I do wrong? I did the same thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, being able to do that is I think, I mean, it's like humbling, but also, for me, at least in my experience, it's how I've learned the most.
And Aaron, you actually just jogged my memory about something that I've done and that I still do, which is if I know that someone's asking something and I'm not positive if I've kind of got that right other half, I'll make sure that I'm giving them what they're looking for. And then I'll say, you know, but I also want to take a minute and walk you through this other thing that I started to do. Here's why I think it's relevant. It only took a few minutes. Let me know if it's worth going further. That gives them an opportunity to say, you know what, that's kind of not the path I wanted to go down, but thank you so much. Or to say, you know what, you are onto something, let's refine it this way or go run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, you're giving them free extra value, and if they like it, you can run with it. And that's, I mean, how I ended up with way too much work on my plate, but you definitely grow quite a bit. It's always worth it. Jennifer asked an interesting question. And really, it's if you think your insights or maybe even advice would be different if you weren't working in the private sector, but were in more government or like a nonprofit kind of environment.
It's almost, and thanks for this question too, it's almost a trick question for me because the I Love New York Tourism campaign is owned by the state of New York. I was technically employed by Empire State Development, which is New York's preeminence or their main development agency. So I was working for the government when I was working on that campaign. I would say that it doesn't change at all. What will change is the data, the quality, the quantity of the data that you might have access to, obviously depending on the NGO or just the non public, or I would include a private entity. I think Johnson & Johnson is still fully a private company. So I'd say it really depends. The key is thinking broadly, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, in thinking beyond actual data as numbers, where data could be, in the example that I gave, it was looking at the creditcards.com and Credit Karma sites and saying, this is where people are going to find out about cards before they choose a Citi card. What is their experience? What does that look like? Or thinking creatively, if you're, I'm trying to come up with something on the fly and not doing a very good job, but let's say that you were an e-commerce company who said, oopsie, we made a mistake and we forgot to collect data. Well, you say, but you're still selling something, right? We say, yeah, well, of course we're still selling something. Do you have any record of that? What might you have? Any data that you can find will still give you an indication of where to go next. So it'll either say, hey, you know what? We missed the boat. We need to start collecting this data, or we need to buy this data set. Or it might say, you know what? I originally wanted to use these numbers, right? I wanted to use average order value, but say there was a blackout on the data. I want to use average order value to answer a question, but all I have is credit card type that people use for purchase. Might knowing what type of a credit card somebody used, might that give you an indication of where to go? Or might where the purchases came from, if that were the only data you had, give you an indication of where to go? Data, even if you feel confident in your data and have a great data set, we're still reliant on each other and on the methods we choose to answer them. And that applies to thinking creatively about data as well. So if you're honest in saying, hey, I wanted to use this, or here's what I have at my disposal, but here's what I think I can make meaning out of in my degree of confidence, that still puts you on a more sure and better footing than what you had before and gives you a chance to have a conversation about what other data to bring into the picture. All good questions from the group. I hope you keep asking more.
Yeah, they're all really good questions. James has another question, and I think it's a good one. Prefacing with he's still a beginner and novice question, and I would say, James, this is like it's kind of cliche, but think of this as a safe space. Honestly, there are no dumb questions. Everyone asks them, so don't be afraid, and don't be embarrassed. Honestly, I guarantee you all the other people on here have similar questions or have asked them. So don't be afraid. If you're totally wrong, it's okay. Then you'll learn something. And so, no one's gonna yell at you or be afraid or, whatever. But he asked, just given that you've worked across a few different industries, what kinds of, this is a more technical question, like languages or programs that you've used to answer more data intensive questions? So, Python, SQL, that sort of thing, or there's something else? And then I'll tag on something else to his question. When you're thinking about, as you're interviewing someone new for your team, what kinds of stuff do you think is kind of like normal, and what do you think sets someone apart? Or what kinds of skills do you think people like today are missing? At least when you're talking to them.
I'm infinitely more qualified to speak to the latter question. The ones that you mentioned, right? Python, SQL, that comes up a lot. I know that people use others. What I'm not confident is when you ask for the most common, I say Python and SQL are the ones that come up the most. SQL, obviously, right, there are different platforms through which you can write SQL. I don't know offhand if there's one that kind of bubbles to the top of all of the others. I know even in using Looker, right, they have LookML, which is like kind of like SQL, but it's not exactly like it. So rather than kind of lead you astray, I can acknowledge that, yes, I know that data analysts and data scientists use a lot of different languages and software, but I couldn't answer your core question on which is the most common or significant. I'd say the most significant one is whichever is going to get the job done and get it done effectively. And I would encourage you when you're screening for a job, if you're a Python expert and they're like, we don't use Python, find out, are they open to it? What would the learning curve be? Because you want to find a good fit between your skill set and the packages that they use. For your second question on, what do I look for? I look for somebody who's curious. I do look for people who are going to challenge me when I ask a question, who are going to know the data far better than I can, to be able to do things like weed out the noise, know how to apply different statistical analyses to figure out the right way to think about the data, either from a visualization standpoint or say, well, if we use this model, we get one answer, but if we use this other model, it might look a little bit different, and to be able to explain that not just to me, but to other audiences as well. And I look for people who are inherently curious. It goes without saying that if you're on the data side, you have to have impeccable attention to detail. But beyond that, right, the candidates who stand out are ones who are going to do this exercise, who are just as good at taking a question, saying, I can do exactly what you asked, is saying, you know what, I'm gonna go noodle around and play around because I know what you're really thinking here and I know what the company's goals are, and I wanna help you get to a better answer because ultimately I share your goal and we're gonna be successful if we have that in common together.
Yeah, very good answer. So we're just gonna do one more question here. See, Jennifer asked, what is this? I'm sorry, Jennifer, I think I'm misreading this. Oh, I see. So she's asking if in 5 years, say 5-10 years, do you think that we'll be using some sort of AI tool to look at the data first and come up with questions to ask, or do you think there'll always be, I'm kind of ad-libbing here, so apologize if I get this totally wrong, Jennifer, but do you think we'll always need human guidance to make sure they're asking the right question to get the job done? And then Merlin, I'll ask your question and then we'll wrap up.
It's good. Yeah, Jennifer, this is a fascinating question. And I happen to kind of geek out in my spare time learning and thinking about things like AI and quantum computing and, understanding the ways that they are hackable or hack-proof and all of that. And I haven't seen anything in the reading that suggests to me that they're going to be asking the right questions. The way that I think about it is whether AI is going to be able to give us answers to the questions we didn't know we were asking or didn't know we should be asking. And I'm debating whether there's more that I kind of want to noodle on with this topic with all of you today. And I'm trying to think of an example, right? So if you're mining e-commerce data for certain patterns, I do think that it's going to be able to, so with AI, just again, thinking a lot on the cuff, I'm not an AI expert. Keeping in mind that I'm a marketer first and foremost, that's my training. I'm not a data scientist by trade. I think with machine learning and with artificial intelligence, yes, you're allowing with AI in particular, you're allowing it to kind of learn on its own, and you don't always know the direction that it's going to go. but you've set the stage for the right parameters. And so that's why I come back to believing that we might be surprised at the pathways that it takes, but that's essentially what my presentation is about, is how do you get to the answer that's more right and more true, not necessarily unexpected, but gets you out of your own starting point. Because when we're starting with a question like, what is my click-through rate, we can, as humans, quickly go through the computational process in the way that AI can, even if we sit down and say, I, as David, I'm going to accept these 20 parameters, and I'm going to go through a thought exercise for the next hour, week, month, whereas the machine can. And that's why I think that, and what I'm suggesting here is, we want to do our best to push ourselves to get to the question that's going to get us to that better answer for differentiated growth and opportunity. And I think AI is going to surprise us by getting right to the answer. It's going to be our job to say, and what question should I have been asking to get there, so that we can then do meaningful things with the answers that it gives us. Come back to me in 5 years. Let's find out if my supposition on that is right. I'll be excited to see what happens, and I'll be learning and watching that space right along with all of you.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely an interesting space, and you always think about, you'll hear things like, my favorite is like the Microsoft racist bot, where it's like, you trained it, the algorithm I'm sure works perfectly, and it just did what it was trained, right?
Because we code our biases into the programs.
Exactly. So I think there's always going to need to be some sort of human interaction, but my 2 cents. And then Merlin, I'll answer your question a little bit and then hand it off to David for a final point. And she asked, if you don't have any experience to any of these data programs or software, like, where can you go to learn them? And obviously the shameless plug is for Promotable, but I think the better answer to that question actually is, first start off with what job you're looking at, where you're looking to work, because I think before, and this, I'm gonna kind of bring this back full circle, right? It's all about asking that question. If you want to be in marketing analytics at some company, well, you can see what they tend to use and what they tend to not use. You can look at job descriptions and kind of get a feel for that. And I know, like, there's a lot of like expensive programs out there. You can just get a sense, or if you want to try and learn a little bit of Python, there's some free stuff. Go to DataCamp and do the first free thing. Go to Udemy and buy a $10 course. Watch things on YouTube. You'll kind of get to see, it's not so much that you're going to become a data scientist from watching an hour of YouTube, but you'll start to maybe point yourself in the right direction to then make a better decision on something more expensive if that's what you think you need. Because to me, the biggest challenge is always, there's lots of stuff that you can learn, but making sure you get the right stuff. Like, maybe you don't need to be a superstar Python expert for what you want to do. And that said, shameless plug, check out Promotable. We have specifically live online stuff, so it's only if you want to be able to ask questions in person or online, not in person right now, thanks COVID, but really be able to do that with someone who does it every day. So that's very specific, but if you're looking for something more at your own pace or what have you, lots of stuff. I'd recommend trying the free stuff first and then taking it from there. But happy to hand that off to David as well.
Thank you. And before we part, I just want to thank Aaron and Promotable for hosting me. Thank you all for listening and for your fantastic questions. I just want to leave you again with the idea that what I'm teaching here is a way of thinking, and it doesn't have to be overwrought or really, really complex. As I shared earlier, it's something we do in a routine way every day. And my hope is that in sharing how that unfolds in our business lives, it can make us all much more curious, much more inquisitive in ways that lead to better results. And that, to me, has made marketing so exciting. And so I hope that you'll think of this as an ongoing practice, as it is for me, and a way to excite yourselves and your careers and your teams as we go forward. And please do find me on LinkedIn. Share your successes with me. Let me know if you're trying this out and what you're learning from it. I'd love to have you circle back. And thank you all again for sharing your time with me tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. And thanks, everyone, for coming. I know a lot of people have the day off today, so lots of other stuff that you could be doing, lots of things you can be watching. I'm sure lots of Netflix shows. So always appreciate everyone coming in and joining the conversation. Again, really appreciate it if whatever platform you're on, you can give us a follow or a like. All that stuff is super helpful. And then, pay attention to your emails. We'll be reaching out with our upcoming slate of events. So that said, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll hope to see you next time.